won't he? And when will he? And what will stop him? These are the kinds of questions the U.S. has about Vladimir Putin, with Russia clearly on the brink of war with Ukraine. President Biden late this afternoon saying U.S. troops could be on the move in the near term and warning Putin personal sanctions are absolutely on the table, too. We're live with a bunch of developments in just the last few hours, plus new developments on COVID, with new clinical trials for a vaccine made specifically for Omicron, even with cases falling and most states expected to peak as soon as next month. Our medical experts standing by to explain why we may need this new shot anyway. And we've also got the scoop about where you can find your free N95 masks as soon as today. And it may be going from bad to worse politically for Boris Johnson over those leaked lockdown parties, why police are now getting involved. Plus, in tonight's original, the record number of gun sales in this country the past year. Our team's looking at what's behind it and the ripple effect. And is the GOAT going to get gone? The talk of the sports world today, whether Tom Brady will retire. We've got more on his new cryptic message and what it all means for the NFL. Hey, I'm Hallie, and we've got a lot to get to tonight. We're coming on the air with all those moving pieces on an international crisis and the new warning from President Biden today, just a couple hours ago, about what would happen if Russia were to invade Ukraine. Watch.
If he were to move in with all those forces, it would be the largest invasion since World War II. It would change the world.
The U.S. thinks a potential invasion could be imminent, so they're trying to figure out what to do now, right? They're working with gas and oil suppliers around the world to help Europe stock up on supplies, just in case Russia were to cut off fuel shipments, which could happen, even as Russia keeps flexing its military muscles. Today, announcing it's going to start some of these military exercises across the country in response to those tensions with the U.S. and NATO. That's after a big plane arrived in Kyiv today, carrying more military supplies from the U.S. And yes, there is a possibility, according to President Biden, you could see troops from the U.S. deploy soon overseas in response to all this. As we're just now learning, the president's considering whether or not to deliver a speech about everything that's going down. I want to bring in Mike Memoli here in Washington. And Mike, let me start there, because we did hear from President Biden today, but it wasn't like a formal set of remarks. We showed it just a second ago. He was out shopping, one of these stops that sometimes presidents and officials do, right, to get out in the community, when he turned to reporters and said, OK, I'll take some questions from you. He clearly wanted to talk about Ukraine, but not in a formal setting. Talk me through the thought process there, what we heard, and if we will hear something more officially from him.
Well, part of his thought process was he was going to get some ice cream too, Hallie. You know, we talk about this all the time. But let's get real here, because what we have been hearing, especially from outside officials, former national security officials in the Obama administration in particular, but also some officials inside the White House, is that where the president has gotten himself into trouble here, and we know he did last week, was by engaging with the public about Ukraine only in the form of question and answer sessions like the one he did today. And that's a problem, because the president needs to be speaking more directly and comprehensively about what's at stake here. And by the way, about some of the costs that American consumers might have to pay in the form of higher gas prices because of what Russia could do to disrupt the energy markets. And so there are discussions, we're now being told, Carolee, Courtney Kube, and me, by multiple officials at the White House, of having a larger speech or perhaps sort of a bigger sit-down interview so that the president can, on more of his own terms, talk about what we're seeing overseas right now, the real threat of imminent invasion here, what the U.S. is prepared to do and to not do, and what costs Americans will have to bear. One of the complications, though, Hallie, and one of the reasons they haven't gotten there just yet, is because the situation is evolving so quickly on the ground. And as one official put it to me, there's a concern that if you put a big speech on the schedule, President Putin might pull a cinema, as they say. He might intentionally do something while the president is speaking or just before the president is speaking to really undercut him, to make him look weak. And so that's all what's happening behind the scenes at the White House right now.
It's important that you bring that up, because there is the concern, right? And you're reporting on it with Carol and Courtney here, that, you know, giving some sort of formal speech could end up poking the bear, you know, poking Putin a little bit more into action. So here's the thing that I think people really are looking at today, because you heard President Biden, and we reported on this 24 hours ago as we were coming on the air with more developments even last night on this show. The idea that, you know, you could have thousands of troops, up to 8,500 of them, moving, right, in theater, going into theater over to Ukraine and Russia, or to the area, the region, I should say, not into Ukraine. And now the president's saying today he might actually deploy some of those troops in the, what he said, near term, like sooner than we think, just because of the logistics involved. What is the timeline that you're hearing on that front?
Well, Hallie, you'll remember ahead of the president's sit down in Geneva with President Putin, the U.S., they were talking about their goal for the U.S.-Russia relationship was to have it be stable and predictable. And what you're hearing from the president today, he's maybe not going to call Putin unstable, but certainly he's unpredictable. He said he doesn't even think Putin is sharing his own thinking with his own closest advisors. And so that's why the president said we have to anticipate every scenario. We have to put at least some of that 8,500 U.S. forces closer in theater. And in part, that's because of the concern, not necessarily just of Ukraine, but of our NATO allies. As we talked about yesterday, seeing these military exercises from Russia in Belarus, not in Russia, but in a neighboring country to many of our NATO allies, has really ramped up the concern level. And so we're responding as much to other allies in the region as we are to Ukraine at this point.
There's also the piece of this, and again, we talked about it on the show. What would happen, right, if there was some sort of energy cratering with fuel and gas, et cetera, coming from Russia? What would it mean for oil prices here at home, et cetera? You now have this discussion that the administration is taking on with, countries in North Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, right, about how do you shore up some of those supplies in Europe if Putin were to pull the plug on that front. That's something that economically could have a ripple effect, Mike.
Yeah, this is so interesting. It's a real tell, I think, Hallie, into some of those behind-the-scenes conversations President Biden is having with our European allies, because it's much easier for the U.S. to bear the burden of some of the economic sanctions we're talking about than it is for our European allies. Russia really does have huge economic leverage over European countries in particular if it decides to cut off its energy supply. So when you see the U.S. doing everything it can to try to find alternate supplies of energy to have at the ready for some of our allies, it's really a way of coaxing them along to really make sure everyone's on the same page for powerful sanctions, no matter what President Putin does, big or small.
Mike Memoli, live for us there outside the White House. A lot of moving pieces, Mike, not to mention the president saying, yeah, he'd be okay with sanctioning Putin personally on this front. So I know you're following all of it. Thanks, Mem. I'm sure we'll talk tomorrow. Appreciate it. We're also just learning from Capitol Hill about somebody else who apparently has testified in front of the January 6th committee, Alex Jones, the noted conspiracy theorist. How do we know this? Who's the source? Well, Alex Jones himself. He's talking about it on his podcast pretty openly, saying that he spoke to the committee but pled the fifth more than 100 times, basically, on advice from his attorney. Remember, Jones sued the committee late last month in response to a subpoena, saying they didn't have the authority to make him answer questions. I talked to a member of that January 6th committee investigating the insurrection, specifically about this, Alex Jones pleading the fifth. Here's what Congressman Jamie Raskin told me not too long ago. We talked about in the segment, he apparently showed up in front of your committee, pleaded the fifth more than 100 times. Have you made any assessment? Has the committee made any assessment yet regarding whether those invocations were legitimate?
Well, the thing that Mr. Jones and all of the defendants and all of the witnesses are forgetting is that the Fifth Amendment is meant to be used selectively if you think that you might be incriminating yourself by answering a question. It's not a magic wand that you wave over the whole proceeding and you don't have to answer anything.
I want to bring in now our senior congressional correspondent, Garrett Haake. Garrett, I thought it was interesting to hear that from Congressman Raskin. Pleading the fifth is not a magic wand, right? If it is not relevant what you had for lunch to whatever they're investigating, it's like a little bit harder to invoke the fifth in a legitimate way about that. And yet here you have Alex Jones pretty openly saying, I talked, but I didn't say much. What are you hearing from your end?
Well, look, I think Alex Jones was not what I would consider to be a super high priority witness for the committee. They knew they had to go get him. Same with Roger Stone, right? These were very high profile figures who were outside the Capitol on January 6th. They couldn't ignore their presence. But as Raskin also told you in that interview, I think they didn't think that they were going to get a ton of useful information from Jones. And it's possible he delivered by invoking the Fifth Amendment as many times as he did. Look, the Fifth Amendment, whether or not it's legally appropriate to use in this circumstance, Jones is making a version of, I think, the same political calculation that a lot of other witnesses have made with this committee is give them a little bit, draw it out, make them fight you in court if they don't like your answer, and hope the clock runs out and you don't have to say more than you otherwise would by not showing up at all.
Do you know anything more about the public hearings from the January 6th Select Committee? Because the congressman told me he expects those by the end of February or March at the latest. That syncs with what you're hearing?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a moving target. The operative word has been spring here. It's been a cold, long winter, so who knows when exactly that'll start. But the committee members get that they need to do this and they need to do it soon. I think Liz Cheney's probably been the most aggressive on this topic. She wants to start bringing these issues out into the sunlight sooner rather than later. She's also got a primary race she needs to try to win up in Wyoming, so the sooner the better as far as she's concerned, to start really having this fight that she's wanted for a long time, but nothing specific from the committee so far.
There's a bunch of different January 6th threads that I think are coming out today. You know, we heard from the Department of Justice side that the head of the Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, has pleaded not guilty with a trial date for him and others on these seditious conspiracy charges set for mid-April. And then we're hearing from somebody, Garrett, who I think is perhaps one of the most interesting people involved in what happened January 6th. And that's somebody, Garrett, I know you know, Officer Eugene Goodman, right? Seen in that now viral video, basically luring rioters away from where lawmakers were huddled just a few feet from where these rioters were, give or take, right? He's not done anything, Garrett, meaning media interviews. We haven't heard from him publicly. It's been over a year, Garrett. I mean, I know you, listen, I think everybody at this network has tried to talk to Officer Goodman. He is now, for the very first time, talking publicly about the moments that we're looking at here on screen, right? This viral video captured by Igor Bobek, your colleague there, who covers Capitol Hill. And it's pretty interesting what he says, that he believes that the restraint from his fellow officers prevented things from getting a lot worse on the 6th. Garrett, take it away.
Oh, hey, I thought you were going to play the audio. No, look, that was probably the most striking part of this interview to me. Officer Goodman talked about the prospect that this could have turned into a bloodbath, that if more officers had drawn their weapons, they didn't know who had weapons in the crowd. They didn't know if there were other officers in the crowd who might have been working with the insurgents on that day. He spoke to just how confusing it was, frankly, how lucky everyone got. And, his reticence to get into the spotlight on this has been notable from day one. I mean, you showed some still images of him there on Inauguration Day when he was serving in an honorary role there. I've talked to him a little bit after the fact, and it was pretty clear that he was even uncomfortable with that degree of spotlight where he didn't have to say anything. The different officers who were involved on that day all have handled this differently. Some folks, like Harry Dunn, who's a name that many of our audience will be familiar with, he likes to talk about it. It's almost therapeutic for him. Other folks have said they got to leave this at the office and go home and try to not carry this around all the time. That's the way Eugene Goodman has handled this, and we respect that, even though I think the whole country, at least a big part of us, would love to hear more of his story whenever he decides he wants to tell it.
You're totally right. Listen, open door here at NBC News to do that. Garrett Haake, thank you so much. I appreciate you walking us through those developments tonight. Thanks. The Biden administration, in another development, is officially taking a step back on their requirement to get workers at big companies vaxxed or tested regularly for COVID. They're withdrawing this mandate effective tomorrow. This is not altogether shocking, right? You had OSHA making this decision after the Supreme Court blocked the mandate earlier this month. The court's conservative majority says the agency does not have the power to, quote, regulate public health more broadly. The administration, remember, put in place this vaccine or test rule back in November. It would have applied to private companies with more than 100 employees. The White House estimated it would cover something like 84 million workers, a ton of people. Maybe you're among them. Not anymore. Pete Williams is here to break this down for us. Pete, this feels a little bit like a format. They didn't really have much more choice. The Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, said you can't do this. Like, what else were they going to do?
So this is technically known as taking the hint. Remember that all that was actually before the Supreme Court was the question of whether the government could enforce this emergency rule while lawsuits against it were pending in the lower courts, and the Supreme Court said, no, you couldn't. But along the way, the court also cast some very serious doubts on OSHA's ability to do this at all, saying that it's not a public health agency. This is beyond its power to do so, even though the Supreme Court also upheld a separate Biden mandate that said the government could impose a restriction requiring vaccinations for people who are in healthcare facilities that treat Medicare and Medicaid patients, because it's much more focused. So two steps here. The government today announced that tomorrow it will withdraw this emergency rule, and today in the Sixth Court of Appeals, where all these cases came from, where they were all consolidated, the government said, okay, we might as well dismiss this case as moot.
Is it possible that OSHA could try to get through some kind of a different version of this vax or test standard, right? Could they change, modify some of the language here? What would that look like?
Well, yes, and as a matter of fact, in the formal register that will be a formal Federal Register notice that'll be published tomorrow, the government says we're withdrawing the emergency rule, but we're reserving the authority to make this a permanent rule and go through the whole rulemaking process. We haven't made up our minds. We might still do that. I think, though, that would face similar problems, because I don't think the Supreme Court is as concerned about whether it was an emergency rule or one that went through formal rulemaking as they are about the ability of OSHA to do it in the first place. So, yes, in theory, the government could try again. And by the way, OSHA says today we're withdrawing the emergency rule, but we still encourage employers and companies to require their employees to get vaccinated and wear masks.
Pete Williams live for us, breaking that developing news down. Pete, always great to see you. Thank you.
You bet.
To COVID now, because a couple of companies say they've started clinical trials to study a COVID vaccine just for Omicron, right? Specifically just for this variant. We're talking about Pfizer and BioNTech, and this would be involving 1,400 people, this trial. It's going to take months, right? It's going to take a long time, which is sort of interesting because you look at what's happening right now. You've got COVID cases going down. That Omicron surge that everybody is very worried about seems to have peaked or be peaking or about to peak in some states, nearly 24 of them. Dr. Fauci says he expects most states to peak by next month. So why is Pfizer putting so much effort into this vaccine just for Omicron, right? A variant that may not be an issue in a couple months. The company says it's basically an insurance policy. Quote, we recognize the need to be prepared in the event this protection wanes over time and to potentially help address Omicron and new variants in the future. I want to bring in Dr. John Torres for us now. So, Dr. John, this is interesting news. This caught a lot of attention today, but is it legit to say, well, this is just an insurance policy, or are these companies just going to continue to play catch up when it comes to variants that may continue to pop up?
And Hallie, I think there's two sides to that coin. And one side, exactly like you talked about, just trying to chase these variants down and basically playing whack-a-mole of variants, trying to vaccinate the whole world every 6 months when these things do happen. On the other side of the coin is what kind of protection do we have right now and what do we want the vaccine to do? And most experts are settling in on the fact that the vaccine, if you're up to date on your vaccine, meaning you're vaccinated and you've gotten the booster shot, you're very well protected against serious illness, hospitalizations, and death. You're not as well protected against getting the sniffles or those mild illnesses if you get Omicron. So do we need a vaccine to prevent that? And that's what they're looking at. Also, Hallie, you have to remember that just 3 months ago, we were talking about the Delta variant. 3 months later, we have the Omicron variant. 6 months from now, when this vaccine is available, will we have the next variant? So we don't know. So chasing these variants is becoming a bit of a puzzle. And I think most experts are now saying, let's get something that we know can protect people from dying, which is what we want the vaccine to do, and kind of settling on that, Hallie.
There's also this news that we had out of the FDA this week about monoclonal antibodies, right? These treatments like Regeneron. People may know that name because we've talked about it a lot in the last year and a half. They're basically saying, hey, it's actually not as effective against Omicron as we thought. We don't recommend it because of that reason. Well, now you have, Dr. John, if you've seen, for many months now, politics playing a part in the pandemic with the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, a Republican there, upset about this, saying they're depriving patients who need it. I don't even know how to ask this question, but I would say, who's right? Kind of who does the science support? Is there any harm to offering Regeneron or keeping that on the market? Do you believe the FDA is making the right decision here?
And Hallie, first and foremost, I do believe the FDA is making the right decision for a variety of reasons. One of them being that both with Regeneron and Eli Lilly, those are the monoclonal antibodies that we've been using for over a year. They have proved to be ineffective against Omicron to the point where they simply don't work at all. Eli Lilly actually came out saying, yes, FDA is correct. They're not working. We think they should be withdrawn and just put on the shelf in case we need them later on. On top of that, you have to realize that when you get an injection like monoclonal antibodies, for the most part, it can be safe, and it usually is safe. But there are rare allergic reactions that people can have side effects from. And so it's not one of those treatments that you want to use if it's not doing any good and it's not helping anybody, which is where I think we are. And so it's a bit of a head scratcher when the governor of Florida is saying, let's go ahead and use it anyway because it's better than nothing. In this case, it might not be better than nothing. And we have other monoclonal antibodies that are starting to be produced. We have these antivirals that are starting to be produced and available. Those are the ones we should be focusing on. Those are the ones we should be using, and not using these ones that not only the FDA, but the company themselves are saying, these aren't effective. Let's go ahead and put them in reserve for now, Hallie.
Dr. John, it's such important perspective. We're glad to have your expertise on that front. Thank you for being with us tonight. Appreciate it. As we talk about politics in the pandemic, we got to talk about the major confusion in New York with schools trying to figure out what is the deal with that state's indoor mask mandate today. Here's why. There's been a back and forth on this. And just in the last couple minutes, like as I was running down to the set, actually, a judge granted the New York's Attorney General's request to keep this mask mandate in place until the state can appeal a judge's decision. That decision said the governor doesn't have the authority to put in place a mandate for schools, right? So there's been this back and forth legally. The education department of the state told schools today to keep enforcing the rule, but you have these schools across the state going, well, what in the world are we supposed to do with these kids in masks? It's all coming because masks are really in focus for the Biden administration, as we've been talking about. The government is trying to get you free masks, not just any mask, but N95s specifically. So if you want to get your hands on one, what do you do? Where do you go? Watch.
400 million free N95 masks are on their way to stores, pharmacies, and health centers across the U.S. Those N95s are considered the best protection against COVID. They're made of a tighter mesh, which means they can filter 95% of particles in the air and trap most of the germs you breathe out.
The N95s are the most effective mask. No doubt about that when you look at it.
So how do you get them? You don't have to show ID or an insurance card. You can get 3 at a time for free at most major chains like Rite Aid, Walgreens, Kroger, and CVS. They'll be stocking the CDC recommended masks, with Walgreens expecting to have some locations ready to give them away by Friday. Some spots in the Midwest are already handing them out. Meijer stores have 3 million of the masks, and they're greeting customers in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, and Wisconsin with masks for the taking. All 275 Hy-Vee pharmacies from Nebraska to Illinois are also stocked up. And if you're in the Southeast, expect your local Winn-Dixie or Harvey's to have masks by the end of the week. By the way, this store list is not exhaustive. Expect more of them to make similar announcements soon. And just a reminder, any mask is better than no mask. So if you're heading into a crowded space and want that extra protection, mask up.
If you're watching that, you didn't see a place near you, do not freak out. You're going to see a location near you announce free masks as soon as the Biden administration gets that program fully up and running. They think that should happen by early February. Yes, right now. I'm going to say some words that will shock you. They will stun you. It is winter. It is here. Okay, I know you're neither shocked nor stunned. It's cold. We get it. It's winter. But here's 2 words that you probably never hope to hear at any point in winter. Bomb cyclone and nor'easter, right? This is what we're potentially facing at the end of the week after we get through these really Arctic temperatures. 31 million of us are under wind chill alerts right now from the northern plains down to Ohio. And listen to how cold it felt for some people. Those wind chills felt like negative 50 degrees below zero in parts of the Dakotas. No, thank you. It's not going to get much better the rest of the week for some of us. And then on the back end, you got that nor'easter that could bring more snow, more winds, more flooding to parts of the Northeast. Al Roker joins us now. Al, talk us through what we can expect. Bomb cyclone, what's the deal?
Well, okay, let's first deal with the cold. That's the first thing up. Now, so we've got a big ridge of high pressure along the west coast, all right? So that's set up there. In the east, up in Hudson Bay, Canada, we've got this Hudson Bay low pressure system. As we look at the maps, and you can see there's basically a conveyor belt pushing in all this cold air. So right now, it feels like it's minus 35 in International Falls, minus 27 in Marquette, Michigan. It feels like minus 20 in Chicago, Indianapolis, minus 12, minus 2 in St. Louis, and Kansas City only feels like it's 2 above. And this is persistent cold, Hallie. Look at Minneapolis. By Friday, only 12. Chicago, you're 10 tomorrow. You warm up to 30 on Thursday, then back down again into the 20s. Same in New York, Burlington, Pittsburgh. Now here's what we're watching. This is what we know about this late week winter storm. We've got a Clipper system dropping out of Canada, an ocean low developing off Florida. These 2 systems, the models agree that they are going to rapidly intensify and merge. This could become what we call a bomb cyclone, going through what we call bombogenesis, which means the pressure of this system drops at least 24 millibars in 24 hours. Hallie, the problem is the ocean waters off the coast are unusually warm for this time of year, so that will fuel rapid intensification. Then it makes its way up the coast. We are looking for snow from Norfolk all the way up into New England. Now, the difference is what are the tracks? The track and the strength will determine the impacts across the Northeast. We could be looking at blizzard conditions, heavy snow, especially once you get north of New York into New England and coastal New England. But it all depends on the track, and that's what we are watching, and that's what we need. Now, the interesting thing is we're below average for many points inland. Albany, only 44% of the snow it should have at this time. Boston is 61% below where it should be. Philly, way below. Where you are, Hallie, you guys are the overachievers. Washington, D.C., 237% of where you should be. You are ahead of Buffalo proportionately. So there's that going for you.
It's not going great, Al. Can I just tell you, I think I've told every person in my life, well, you know, Al Roker says February may be warmer than usual in Washington. So we're clinging
That's right.
to that.
We're looking to flip the switch.
You are my silver lining hope. Al Roker, thank you so much, friend. Really appreciate you being on. We'll look for more of you tomorrow morning on The Today Show. Coming up here on NBC News Now. You know, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, these parties that keep leaking are getting him into more and more trouble. Now, the police are involved. We've got Keir Simmons in London with this latest new twist that could mean trouble for Bojo. So you know who we've been talking about, some of the trouble that British Prime Minister Boris Johnson potentially faces? It's because of these parties that keep leaking, right, that we keep hearing about that happened during the height of the lockdown when COVID was raging throughout the UK. Well, now, here's the latest twist. Police are now getting involved. And the Prime Minister seems okay with that. Watch.
I welcome the Met's decision to conduct its own investigation because I believe this will help to give the public the clarity it needs and help to draw a line under matters.
So the London police are not saying which specific parties or events they're looking at or even how long this investigation is going to take. Now, remember, this is separate, right? This is not the same thing. It is separate from the internal investigation happening that the Prime Minister's office itself has already launched. Guess who's back for us? Live in London, staying up late. Keir, we always talk about parties. We never have them. That needs to change. But Boris Johnson, like, this is, you know, now the police are involved here, right? This is a new piece of this puzzle. Right. How does that maybe change the game for what was already a pretty precarious political situation for the Prime Minister?
Yeah, Hallie, not only my back, but I'm actually standing tonight.
I know, I see you.
Downing Street, now known as the Party House. And it's one of those quintessential aspects of British politics that I can stand here so close to the door of number 10 that, you know, I could walk up and knock on the door. Very likely or possibly the Prime Minister can hear what people are saying in the street. Although we don't know tonight, perhaps he is buried in this report. We don't know whether he's going to get it tonight. Reports say that maybe he won't get it until tomorrow. Maybe he will make a statement to the House of Commons tomorrow, having seen this independent investigation. In terms of that police investigation, stunning, isn't it? That now you have the British Prime Minister having to say that he doesn't not believe that he did anything illegal. It is the evidence that was collected by that internal investigation when they apparently interviewed police officers that was then passed on to Scotland Yard. Scotland Yard's commissioner now saying that they are investigating, as you say, not saying which parties they're investigating. So, you know, this world-famous political address deep in political intrigue tonight.
So, Keir, you know, this independent investigation that's being conducted by some Sue Gray, as we've talked about, this is really critical because it is kind of the linchpin that I think there are people in his own party who are looking to see what this report says. We could, by the time we wake up tomorrow morning, think U.S. viewers, Keir, like, we could know what's in it. Is that the timeline? Is that the deal? Walk me through what the expectation is for us.
Yeah, maybe. It's an internal investigation. Sue Gray, though, is known to be pretty tough, so people are definitely intrigued to know what's in it. Here's the trouble, though, tonight. And again, there's so much political intrigue. Things are shifting frequently. The trouble tonight, though, there are reports that Downing Street is suggesting that not all of the report will be published because there's now a police investigation, so they'd like to wait until after that police investigation is finished. And just like over there, police investigations can take a long time. So when the Prime Minister says that he welcomes the police investigation, perhaps perhaps that's not just a politician speaking. Maybe he really, really does welcome it because, in a sense, we say here, I don't know if you guys have this saying, perhaps it kind of kicks things into the long grass. The question, of course, for the Prime Minister is, does he still have the support of his party? Will there be enough members of his party saying that they would like a no-confidence vote to trigger that? And again, we said last night just how ruthless British politics can be. Of course, things can move very, very fast here. The removal trucks can be in this street within days, or Boris Johnson, the great survivor, could move past this just as he's moved past so many controversies.
Keir Simmons posted up outside 10 Downing for us. Keir, we don't have kicks it into the long grass. We have kicks the can down the road, which I feel like is maybe the same kind of thing, right?
There you go.
Keir Simmons, appreciate it. I'm sure we'll talk again soon, friend.
Right.
Thank you. Bye, pal. Still ahead.
You bet.
A snag for Elton John's farewell concerts in Dallas canceled because he's tested positive for COVID. We've got more details coming up in the 5 things. Plus, this inflation surge we've been talking about might push the feds to hike interest rates this year. So what does that mean for your money? We're talking about it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, North Korea has fired off what appear to be 2 cruise missiles today, according to a South Korean official. Kim Jong-un, who heads the North, has repeatedly said he's trying to bolster military presence there. This would be the country's 5th missile test this year. Number 2, military forces are now in power in Burkina Faso after detaining the country's now ousted president. The former leader faced protests for not being able to stop attacks from Islamist militants in the West African country. The government there has been dissolved, its borders shut down. It's a story we're watching. Number 3, rescue crews managed to free some of these drivers who got stranded in Turkey and Greece after huge snowstorms basically trapped people in their cars all night long. The roads are mostly clear now after some spots saw 31 inches of snow there. You got some limited flights now picking back up at the airport in Istanbul after it was shut down. Number 4, Elton John is postponing a couple of Dallas concerts after he tested positive for COVID. He was supposed to be performing his big farewell tour at the American Airlines Center today and tomorrow. His team says he's doing okay. He only has mild symptoms. No word yet on when those dates will be rescheduled. Number 5, have you heard about this? Neil Young, he wants all of his music scrubbed off Spotify. Why? He doesn't want it on a platform with vaccine misinformation. In a now deleted post, Neil Young said they can have Rogan or Young, not both. He's referring to, you see him on screen, Joe Rogan. He's, of course, a famous podcast host who said things that aren't true about vaccines. Young has been an outspoken advocate for COVID safety. So we're getting closer to hearing about whether the Fed is going to raise interest rates to try to fight against the highest inflation we've had in a generation, in 40 years. We're going to hear from Chairman Jerome Powell tomorrow, right? He's the Fed chair after a couple days of meetings with a lot of analysts predicting they could raise rates a few times this year. Steve Leisman is here to help sort this out for us. Steve, it's great to see you on the show. Thank you. So listen, in plain English terms here, if the Fed hikes interest rates, inflation will start to hopefully go down, right?
Right. So in plain English, the Federal Reserve is seeking a new monetary policy equilibrium. That was just a joke.
That was
what's trying. What
I was like, Steve, that's it. You're off. We're done.
I'm done. Okay. Here's what I think is trying to happen here. The Federal Reserve along with the federal government, pumped a lot of money into the economy during the pandemic. And in fact, the economy turned around and ended up being a bit stronger than they thought it was going to be. You had the supply bottlenecks develop. You had inflation develop. You said it, highest inflation in a generation or two, actually. And now what the Fed has to do is much more quickly than had been anticipated withdraw that stimulus. Think about it like draining the pond. Get down to sort of a normal level of stimulus in the economy. And it's going to do that. I think what's going to happen tomorrow is the Fed chairman is going to say, hey, it's time to start getting going on this. And they'll probably raise rates as many as 4 times this year. What does that mean? It means a 1% funds rate. But don't get too excited by that, because when we went into this pandemic, the Fed funds rate, which is the short-term interest rate, was at 1.75, and it'll happen over the course of the year. The real story here is the Fed is doing what needs to be done to fight inflation, withdrawing stimulus to stop stimulating the economy and generating all that inflation, doing it more quickly, but really not yet getting back to even where we were before the pandemic.
Is this somewhat baked into the market, Steve? Because listen, I think the last time you were on, you gave the very good, I know you're not a financial advisor, but you gave the very good perspective that if you're in the markets for the long term, for retirement, let's say, you shouldn't really be freaking out day to day. But if you do want to kind of be looking at the scope of the markets, do investors kind of know, like, listen, the Fed's probably going to make this move for the reasons that you laid out, and is that kind of priced in, or will we see some maybe market volatility as this goes on?
So the market has been a better ride than, I don't know what you want to call it, the cyclone at Coney Island, or I guess the Dragon Coaster is the one I grew up with here in Rye, in Playland. It's been an unbelievable roller coaster ride the last several days. And yes, investors know it's coming, but that doesn't mean that they're settled with it. You know, just because you digested or ate something doesn't mean it sits in your stomach. They have been up and down on this. What's really happening is, call it a game of hot potato, just to use another metaphor here. It's the stocks are hot, especially the NASDAQ ones, the highly valued tech stocks. And it's like, well, our interest going to be 2%? I don't want to hold this stock, so they give it to somebody else. And back and forth and back and forth. We had two of the most stunning drops and recoveries in the last 2 days. And this is the kind of, well, it's on steroids, but it's a kind of volatility we've seen around the time when the Fed changes policy. So investors are getting used to it. They know it's coming, but they have to really get accustomed to it.
You are the master of plain English, Steve. I so appreciate you. Thank you for breaking it down. I'm sure we'll be talking again soon, I think, especially after this meeting and this news conference in the Fed tomorrow. Thank you, pal.
Get that monetary policy equilibrium down.
Yeah,
for sure.
Bye. Still to come, an update to a story we told you about last week. The governor of Kansas now ordering an investigation into the foster care agency that handled the case of a teen who died at a juvenile center. That was our original. We've got more details in the local coming up in a second. Plus, with gun violence on the rise across the country, so are gun sales. Steve Patterson is looking into us for tonight's original. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, a second New York City police officer has died today after that shooting in Harlem on Friday. 27-year-old Wilbert Mora was shot in the head. His partner, 22-year-old Jason Rivera, died that night. They were responding to a domestic incident. Mayor Eric Adams and officials from the NYPD are remembering both as heroes. From our Midwest Bureau, a warning that the footage you're about to see may be hard to watch. Kansas's governor has ordered the Department of Children and Families to investigate a foster care agency's handling of the death of a 17-year-old. We reported this story last week. Cedric Lofton became unresponsive while being restrained, face down for more than 30 minutes at a juvenile center in September. He died a couple days later. The governor, Laura Kelly, says the state is looking into whether proper policies were followed. And from our West Coast Bureau, crews out in Southern California have managed to contain about 45% of a fire near Big Sur. It's being called the Colorado Fire, and it's burned through about 700 acres just since Friday afternoon. We still don't know how the fire started. Now to today's original, with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. 38 million. That's the number of background checks the FBI says were run in 2021. That's a lot. It's actually the second highest year ever, right behind the record number in 2020. And with more of those background checks, you're seeing more gun sales too. It seems that people want protection. And the pandemic seems to be bringing more first-time buyers to the gun store. But recently, gun violence has also increased, along with those ownership records. We wanted to learn more about who these new gun owners are. So Steve Patterson took a look for us.
Nestled among the high-priced luxury boutiques that line the world-famous shopping district in Beverly Hills, a new shop is burning through inventory, and it has nothing to do with designer goods.
People are almost, I would say, rushing down here because they just believe that the world is turning such a negative place and such a dangerous place. They are calling every moment of every day, and we are happy to give them those services.
Across the country, gun sales are surging, while gun violence is spiking. Last year, more than 20,000 people were killed by a firearm in the United States. In 2021, the Gun Violence Archive saw the most deaths on record since its founding in 2014.
This gun here has been incredibly popular with our female clientele.
Russell Stewart runs Beverly Hills Guns, an appointment-only boutique serving well-to-do clients right off the main drag. And he says business is booming.
How many people are you seeing that have never held or owned a gun before?
I would say right now we're looking at about 95% of our customers in the last 2 months are all first-time gun buyers. Absolutely.
The FBI ran more than 38 million firearm background checks in 2021, making it the second highest year of sales ever, behind 2020.
What have you seen as far as the trend of gun buyers? Who comes in to buy guns? And has that changed in like the last 3 months?
The trend of gun buyers who are coming in are definitely people under 25 and people over 65. A lot of people who traditionally lean left, who would probably not be a gun person, have been saying, well, it's the first time that I've ever thought about buying a gun in my entire life. So it's been someone who probably doesn't have much gun experience, probably didn't have a family member who owned a gun. The influx of people have been because of crime. The influx of crime, especially in the city of Beverly Hills, has driven people to focus more on their own personal safety, and that has truly involved buying, several guns.
Emily Junkins says personal experience pushed her to take matters into her own hands.
So there were 2 shootings, or I don't want to say shootings, shootouts right outside my apartment, right there by the Orlando Hotel. And, I heard the whole thing. My neighborhood is very family-oriented. It's basically all families, even in my building, and it's really scary.
But most of the victims of gun violence don't look like the smaller, more affluent population of Beverly Hills. More than 2/3 of the country's most populous cities have seen more homicides in 2021 than in 2020. Nick Suplina, senior vice president at Everytown for Gun Safety, points out there's a direct correlation between the strictness and variance of your state's gun laws and gun-related violence.
There are key foundational laws that when states enact, we see meaningful change in gun violence rates. Chief among them are background checks on all gun sales, permitting systems for who may carry in public. These are crucial laws to keeping the public safe from gun violence. Also, though, are equally bad laws, stand your ground laws, permitless carry, where without any permitting system or license, individuals can carry in public.
And that the solution to protecting yourself against gun violence isn't buying more guns.
Those states that have the better gun laws have lower rates of gun violence. So long as we have hundreds of millions of guns in this country, we are going to have gun violence at an unacceptably high rate. But the real key is that we can do common sense, simple things in our laws to reduce gun violence.
Steve Patterson is joining us now to talk more about this. Steve, thank you so much for reporting out tonight's original for us. I was struck by this moment where the owner of that shop said, the new buyers are either sort of younger, really young, under the age of 25, or they're older, right? 60, 70, et cetera. What else is standing out to him about some of these new buyers?
Yeah, Hallie, think about this. Last year, the firearms industry sold 6 guns for every 100 Americans. When you hit a critical mass like that, it is almost assuredly across several demographics. And sure enough, you heard Russ in the piece, as you just said, he thinks 95% of his clients are new gun owners, many over 65, many under 25. And if you look at the data, the National Shooting Sports Foundation says that black gun buyers rose by 58% in 2020 compared to 2019. A study last year found that half of all U.S. gun buyers since 2019 are women. People say it's self-protection. People say it's self-empowerment. Of course, we heard that. But we also have to say that the ATF released their own data from 2020 showing a very high percentage of recently purchased firearms were recovered in crimes shortly after they were bought. So we also know they're ending up in the hands of the wrong people in a lot of cases.
Steve
Hallie?
Patterson, it is important reporting, and we're really grateful to you for bringing it to us. Thank you so much. We're going to stay on this topic in tomorrow night's Original 2 with more coverage on gun ownership, this time about the focus to get guns off the street. Our Maura Barrett went to Denver to talk to a nonprofit that's repurposing guns to help plant new life by making them into garden tools. That's tomorrow right here on Hallie Jackson Now. Time now to get the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. Think about this. When was the last time you let a computer make a decision for you? Whether to turn right or left, for example, probably not that long ago. You used the GPS to tell you how to get somewhere. Did you let Spotify or Pandora give you a music or a podcast recommendation? Did Netflix give you a movie rec catered specifically to what you like? There's even an app that helps divorced couples talk to each other without getting into arguments. It's all about the algorithm, right? But what happens when we start to rely too much on this artificial intelligence? It's what Jake Ward, our NBC News correspondent, is talking about in his brand new book, The Loop, How Technology is Creating a World Without Choices and How to Fight Back. Basically, Jake writes that most human behavior is pretty predictable. It follows pretty predictable patterns, good and bad. And companies are using AI to find those patterns and profit off them. Jake is here now to talk about how this all came together in tonight's Backstory. Friend, congratulations. We are so excited for you. It's a big deal.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Hallie, and thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. Listen, you know the backstory. You've done this segment before. It is really pulling back the curtain behind the scenes as to what goes into a story, or in this case, you know, an entire book that you've been researching for something like a decade, right? When did you know, as you were looking through your stories and your notes, that you had enough material to actually go forward and take this step and write a book?
Well, you know, I had an early phase of my editorial life when I was the editor-in-chief of Popular Science magazine. And, you know, I was a very upbeat person when it came to technology. And I remember attending a robotics competition run by the government, the DARPA Robot Challenge in 2013 in Florida. And I remember watching how incredibly difficult it was for these robots to do even the simplest things. And I remember thinking, oh, boy, you know, we'll never get to that point, I think, where robots really replace, you know, us in this thing. It was a really pivotal experience for me. And, you know, it really got me thinking about our ambitions for robots. But then, Hallie, it got dark. And I'd say by about 2016, I had this totally transformative experience. I basically went to a dinner, a kind of casual dinner here in San Francisco with a bunch of entrepreneurs, young app makers, and a bunch of them had studied basically behavioral science. And we were gathered together with Indian food and beers, and we're listening to a couple of addiction experts, these two guys who had just gotten out of a PhD program, and they were explaining to the room, here is how the brain habituates to something like cocaine or heroin. And here is how we can use our understanding of addiction to help make your apps that you are making as addictive as possible. They were offering their expertise to make stuff addictive. And they were asked, I remember at one point, well, is there anyone you would not sell that ability to, your expertise in addiction to? And they said, you know what, we don't think we want to be the, I think they said, the thought police of the internet. We just, you know, we're going to sort of leave it as it is. And so I began to see the libertarian tendencies of Silicon Valley, where all things are kind of considered equal, the pattern recognition algorithms that people were deploying to get people to do things, and then the growing realization that so much of our behavior is pattern-based. And I started to think, uh-oh, we are on a scary course here, Hallie, and that is why I decided to write this book.
It is so fascinating. I legit can't wait to read it. One of the things about you, you know, you are so, we always call you brilliant when you come on the show because you are, but you're very well researched, right? You talk to a lot of people. There's so many people behind these systems that you're talking about, right? How do you narrow down who to talk to, and how do you actually get them to talk to you in the first place? Because some of what you describe is perhaps, you know, listen, it's not super flattering to some of these people.
It is true, you know, and the difficult part, I think, in this beat is, of course, that you are always accused of not fully understanding the technical, you know, facets of AI.
Like you don't get it, journalists. You don't get it, right?
Yeah,
it's that
you don't
attitude.
get it, right?
Yeah,
You're not smart enough. You're not a qualified data scientist. That's exactly right. At the same time, though, there are a lot of really smart, ethically motivated people in that industry who can sense that something scary is happening, and they start to want to talk to you because they start to understand, wait, something may be a little off in what I am purveying to millions and sometimes billions of people. You know, I bumped into someone the other day who was describing to me how he did marketing for some of the most addictive online casino simulator games out there, the kind of games that charge you money but never allow you to win money. And he was describing, he said, I stopped doing that work when I realized that I was using the grade point average of customers to figure out who would be most likely to become addicted to these online casino games. And, so you get these people saying, wow. I think maybe I'm part of something I don't want to be. That's how they talk to. And then the researchers, the behavioral scientists, they've been ignored for so long. I think they're pretty eager to get their words out there. And so marrying those two worlds, that's really how I did it.
The Loop by our own Jake Ward. Jake, we're so glad to have you on the show to talk about the backstory, the behind-the-scenes piece of it. It is super interesting. We're really excited for you and for the book. Thank you for being on.
Thank you so much, Hallie.
Coming up next, of course, coming up next. Will he or won't he? We're talking about the retirement speculation around Tampa Bay Bucs quarterback Tom Brady. So what's he saying about it? More on that cryptic message. Plus, just into us tonight, we're hearing from Brady's ex-teammate Antonio Brown for the first time since he got cut from the Bucs. Wait till you hear what he told Bryant Gumbel next. We are just hearing, and I mean just hearing, from Antonio Brown for the first time since he got cut by the Tampa Bay Bucs after he ran off the field, remember, in the middle of a game against the Jets. He and his lawyer are talking with Bryant Gumbel on HBO in a new interview airing tonight. This new clip has just been released. It's pretty short, but Brown says he was injected with this anti-inflammatory drug, Toradol, to deal with an injury. And then went on to say that the Bucs offered him $200,000 to get treatment for mental health issues. Watch for yourself.
These guys at Tampa Bay Bucs try to make an agreement with me to give me $200,000 to go to the crazy house so these guys could look like they know what they're talking about. These guys are professional.
Wait.
They treated me
They
wrong.
offered you $200,000 for what?
The offer was Antonio would basically sit on the sidelines, go on some list, and commit himself to some form of intensive mental health treatment.
His lawyer later added that the Bucs general manager specifically told them not to spin this any other way. Morgan Chesky is here now to talk more about this. Morgan, listen, Antonio Brown is, a controversial, now former NFL star, walked off the field. We covered this in the middle of a game, was ultimately released by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We're now hearing from him for the very first time, and that's what went down, as you just heard.
Yeah, Hallie, and it was a stunning scene when he walked off mid-game. There was another portion of that clip that I had a chance to listen to, Hallie, in which Bryant Gumbel asked him if he walked off the field specifically because he was not catching enough passes. And we heard Brown say that Tom Brady was his guy. He tried to get him the ball as much as possible, and that was not the reason that he left the field mid-game. That is a direct refuting of what head coach Bruce Arians said whenever he was asking that post-game press conference why Brown left. So Brown now sharing his side of the story publicly. Important to note that while he's no longer a member of the Bucs organization, the next season isn't all that far away. And while he has been a highly controversial figure over the last several years, teams want to be as competitive as possible. And we'll be keeping a close eye on next season to see if and when any team actually picks Antonio Brown up. Hallie?
It's a great point, Morgan. As we talk about the reason, listen, one of the reasons why Antonio Brown ended up right with the Bucs is partly because of Tom Brady, who felt like he was able to have this professional relationship with Brown, relied on him here. With Tom Brady, you've also got these questions about what's going to happen with him next season. There's this new Instagram post today where Brady says, I understand that at this stage in my career, there is going to be interest in my future, but this week, he says, all that is on my mind is the gratitude I have for this team and the fans that have supported us. To call these speculation about whether or not Brady will retire at a fever pitch would probably be an understatement, like if you listen to Sports Talk Radio, Morgan. What other clues do we have, right? Because this is, he's in his 40s at this point, Which doesn't mean he should retire. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just giving viewers context of what it means to be in your 40s.
Of course. 44 years old. Brady has said publicly that he wants to play until 25. That's not too far away. That's going to come up in August, right? He said that, of course, he wants to focus on his family time. And he has acknowledged that his priorities have always been about winning football games, but it's not lost on him that his 3 kids are getting older, and that he acknowledged to ESPN that the sacrifice they've given to him to allow him to play the game has been incredible, and he wants to be able to give the same back to them. He says, on Monday morning, he was able to sit down and have waffles with his family for the first time, and he didn't know how long. And it was little moments like that that have become, I think, more and more important to Tom over the last several seasons as his kids have gotten older, and as he has as well. He said time and time again he wants to play as long as he can competitively. The GM for the Buccaneers has said, hey, you can play for us until you're 50. Tom has come out and said, I don't know about that, but we saw how successful they were winning that Super Bowl with Brady, and then to make a run into the playoffs here. That was an incredibly close game against the Rams. Yeah. A lot of people wondering what's going to come next with Tom, but only he is the one right now that has that answer. Hallie?
Which is why I didn't even ask you what do you think he's going to do, because who knows, right? You're not only Tom Brady really knows for sure. Morgan, it's always great to talk sports with you. I appreciate you being on the show, covering those headlines for us. Thank you.
Of course.
And that's it for this hour. More for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.